Nothing in the Dark is among the more soft-spoken, pensive episodes of the series. There's plenty of dialogue, but its subject matter and themes are addressed with grace, understanding, and patience. It features a well-known small cast and was the first episode produced to be directed by one of the Twilight Zone's most prolific behind-the-scenes forces. Wanda Dunn is an elderly woman who lives in a condemned apartment building. One evening, a shootout ensues in her alleyway, leaving a bleeding-to-death police officer begging her for help. Wanda doesn't have a phone and is reluctant to let the officer, named Harold Belden, inside, thinking that it's a trick by Mr. Death trying to kill her again. Eventually, she helps the cop and does her best to care for his gunshot wound. They get to talking, and she tells him she's seen death coming for years, since she was a little girl. She's seen him with others just before they die, always looking different. Now that she's older, Wanda fears even going outside, constantly on the lookout for the entity that will bring her end. Belden still needs a doctor, and without a phone, he asks her to help him by getting one. That would require her to leave her home though, which is something she struggles heavily with as the officer's life hangs in the balance. This was the third episode aired, but the first produced that brought on Lamont Johnson to direct. He hit the ground running with this emotional two-character piece. There's only one set, and the focus is all on the performances, which Johnson always liked since he was also an actor himself. He was able to convince the powers that be to bring in distinguished actress Gladys Cooper to play Wanda. Johnson worked with Cooper in theater prior to this production, so the trust between director and performer was already established. From there, Johnson remembered seeing a young Robert Redford in a small part on CBS's Playhouse 90. The 1960 episode was called In the Presence of Mine Enemies and was written by Rod Serling. The director was impressed with Redford's work and look, so he suggested him to Serling and producer Buck Houghton. They agreed, but the final call had to be made by Gladys Cooper, who needed to approve the actor to work with him. He charmed Cooper and Johnson upon their meeting, and the episode had its male lead. Redford was very new at the time, only in his mid-20s. Johnson recalled that it was almost like working with a non-actor at that point. I'll say that Redford doesn't tank this episode in the slightest, but this really could have been an all-time classic with an actor that fit the part better. He's not bad, but feels very bland in the role. Considering what happens later and some of the dialogue he was given, what turned out as a few delightful scenes could have been some of the most emotionally bittersweet in the whole series. I get that a portion of this part was intentionally underplayed, like he needed to be a blank slate, but after a certain point, I just wish there was a warmer presence for Cooper to interact with.
Please, don't cry. I don't want to hurt you. Please, I'm sorry. There.
Cooper carries this episode like a champ. Her natural English accent didn't fit the feel of the Wanda character, so she worked with Lamont Johnson to make it less elegant for the role. Her cumulative performance from body language to delivery, and especially the frightened emotional scenes, are that of a true seasoned actor. She was great.
When the bus reached the end of the line, she was dead.
I've seen him since several times. I've seen him in crowds. I've watched for him. Every time someone I knew died, he was there.
Luckily for us, Cooper would appear again in 2 memorable installments in seasons 4 and 5. She didn't even see Nothing in the Dark until filming her next episode, Passage on the Lady Anne, the following year. One of the crew members ran it for her, and she was reportedly very moved, but disassociated from her acting. It was apparently like she was watching someone else on screen, which matched up with how she acted on set, always referring to her character in the third person when referencing what she was going to do in any particular scene. In a short third role, R.G. Armstrong played a contractor tasked with getting Dunn out of the condemned apartment and tearing it down. He gives a subtle but effective speech about letting go and the natural order of things. The themes of this story are summed up in his dialogue.
It's the way things are. A big tree falls and new ones grow right out of the same ground. Old animals die and young ones take their places. Even people step aside when it's time.
I won't.
George Clayton Johnson wrote his 5th episode to air here and recalled loving everything about how it turned out. He was even on set for the filming and had previously known Robert Redford. In his supplemental content on the Blu-ray set, the scribe said he specifically remembered the circumstances around writing this episode. He was apparently stuck at one point, and a conversation with pal Charles Beaumont resulted in George cracking the rest of the story. Johnson also mentioned that he was able to keep one of the plates mounted above the Belden character's bed as a memento. The initial inspiration for the script was a Ray Bradbury tale called Death and the Maiden. This story's main idea is similar, but changes enough about it to feel original. After the contractor leaves her with one last warning to move out, Wanda is angry that Belden didn't help explain the situation to him. But after noticing he has no reflection in her mirror, Dunn finally sees the officer for who he really is, Mr. Death himself. Death explains that there's nothing to be afraid of. He didn't hurt the old woman and even listen to her. What she's really scared of is the unknown. Death asks Wanda to trust him and take him by the hand. Through tears, she finally does, and looks down to see her body, peaceful in its final rest. Relieved that she's passed on painlessly, Wanda is let out into the sun and on to eternity. It's a very emotionally satisfying yet melancholy finish to the episode. Wanda is desperately hanging on to life, but there's sadly not much left to live for. She's alone in a small space with no friends or family, and her words about loving the sun and hating the darkness and cold when she was younger shows us she's in an awful spot. Too afraid to even take a step outside, Mr. Death comes to her as a mercy.
Mother, give me your hand. What you feared would come like an explosion is like a whisper. What you thought was the end, the beginning.
One could compare Nothing in the Dark to One for the Angels or The Hitchhiker. All three have a human personification of death, and all the main characters are dead by the end. Nothing in the Dark is really good, but I don't think it quite matches the raw emotion at the end of One for the Angels, and I love The Hitchhiker, so it didn't come very close to that one either. But it's absolutely worth watching for a fantastic performance and an endearing commentary on the acceptance of death as a part of life and moving on.
There was nothing in the dark that wasn't there when the lights were on. Object lesson for the more frightened amongst us, in or out of the Twilight Zone.